Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Jada Davis. I'm a senior here at the college, and I'm here on behalf of the Martin Scholars Program. I see there are a lot of other Martin Scholars here as well, so hello to everyone. Today, we are going to be talking about everything post-grad, essentially. So today's session is called New City, New Job, New Networking, and it will be centered around just that. We'll be learning how to navigate moving to a new place, rebuilding your network, kind of all of the things that I feel like seniors, if there are any other seniors in this session as well, are probably all thinking about right now. At least I know I am for sure. To the audience, you can submit any questions you have in the chat feature. So if you have any, definitely go ahead and put them in. We'll get to those shortly. But for our council members that are joining us today, we have Julia Race and Kyle Rees. Julia Race is the Director of Strategy at Integral and has worked with Fortune 500 executives in New York City to develop brand activation strategies for North America and globally. After graduating from the college, she took a gap year and came back to New York City after, so she definitely knows the ins and outs of having to rebuild and restart in a new place. Kyle Rees is the Director of Research at Gertner Incorporated, a global research and advisory firm, and works with marketing leaders across industries. He was a transfer student at CofC, originally from McLean, Virginia, and now resides in Northeast DC. So both council members are well versed in the realm of starting fresh. We are so grateful and excited to have them here with us today. To start us off, I have a super easy question for you two. Nothing super daunting just yet. But if you could tell us, what are your top 3 do's and don'ts of navigating a new network in a new city? I'll hand it over to our council members, Julia and Kyle, for the main portion of this.
Are we gonna rock, paper, scissors for this one, Julia, or?
I'm gonna volunteer you because honestly,
right.
Jada, you were like, I'm gonna start you off with a softball, and I have to think about that one. So Kyle,
I didn't want to say the same thing, but yeah, top 3 things. Okay, so the hot take here, the top 3 things, and this is totally fresh, so I'm glad this is getting recorded. I guess for me personally, it was I volunteered and I joined like a social club, which will probably feel and look a lot different in the kind of like current environment for obvious reasons. There aren't as many kickball or dodgeball leagues littering the nation's mall as there was in 2010. So I'm sure there's like a million other like games or like virtual activities that people can do now, social networks that you can join online. So I would encourage you to find something like that for the purpose that when the world does get back to normal, you have some sort of established base there. Volunteering was, I think, kind of a second part of that. I think like for me, like kind of a new city, like DC was kind of like a new city for me, even though it was, kind of the metropolitan areas where I grew up. I think some of you, this is maybe more unique to my situation, but I'm sure some of you are like contemplating the same thing. I think like, something to do is if you do have that opportunity, if you're moving back home, the city will feel a little bit different. It's not anything to be ashamed of to move back with your parents for a couple of months while you get yourself grounded on your feet. Your family is honestly probably one of the best like social networks that you can have. And I realize, that I would extend that to include like friends, distant relatives, etc. It doesn't just have to be immediate family members. Understanding that there's a pretty broad kind of set of concepts that, for how we might define family. And I think the third thing is just have an open mind to, who you're going to meet, how you're going to meet people. I think it, requires us to be a little bit, I think, more open to like new scenes, new situations, certainly in this day and age. So yeah, I think just like be open to kind of like what comes your way to, like make sure you have that opportunity, to kind of do something new, meet new people. Something that I think like at this point in your senior year in college, you guys you're all likely probably pretty well versed in. Just kind of keep that spirit alive, and that will certainly take you a long way.
Good advice. Yeah, I mean, I agree with a lot of what Kyle just shared. I think for me as well, joining professional communities definitely played a big role in my first year in New York. I'm originally from Philly, but I came to New York from Charleston. So New York was a totally new scene for me as well. And it felt very daunting too. So just getting to know people. I mean, I'm dating myself, but like I joined a couple meetup groups, which I'm not even sure meetup is a thing anymore, but essentially just finding people who sort of shared common interests. About a year or two after I graduated, I started getting really interested in leadership coaching. But I was 22, 23 and didn't really know or feel permission necessarily to really jump head on into that. So I actually found a couple coaching communities that allowed me to just chat with people who had already gotten their certification or people who were thinking about doing it. And that really helped me a lot, actually, and was a big method for me in terms of networking. I think the other thing for me too is, and I think it's not the same now as it was when I graduated, but I bought a lot of strangers coffee. I took tons of people for coffees. I mean, I got really good at sort of a cold LinkedIn inbox pitch, essentially, to just sort of compel people's better angels to just, let this like freshly graduated person take them for like an informational breakfast or coffee. But I think something that I was told when I was an undergrad that is definitely true is that at the end of the day, people love talking about themselves. So, most people were helped by other people when they were getting their start. So it's usually true that people want to return the favor. I would say now, I mean, same thing applies, like virtual networking, join some LinkedIn communities, start following I always say start following agencies on Twitter and Instagram and TikTok now and Twitch even. Just get to know sort of the landscape that you're interested in now, so that for the rest of this year you can start to hone in on the specific people who really pique your interest in terms of what they do and start to form like personal relationships with them. I think personal relationships go a long way if you're thinking about moving to a new city, starting in New York or DC or really anywhere. Relationships are like everything. So start sort of identifying who those people are now so that you can stalk them, which is what I did my senior year of school.
Amazing. Well, thank you. I feel like in this day and age with the technology that we have, that as weird as it sounds, stalking people has become a lot of our second nature, whether it's looking them up on LinkedIn or Facebook to try and find that mutual connection. So thank you for all of those helpful tips. I'm going to read some questions out from the chat box. We have one from Marley, who I know is your mentee in the program. She said, how do you suggest navigating networking in a new city in a virtual environment other than Zoom? And whoever.
Marley, could I ask you if you feel comfortable, if you are in a position to go off mute and say what you mean by other than Zoom?
Yeah, I was just curious, like Zoom has been such a huge feature in networking, connecting with people, but if there's any other like ways you could do that virtually other than Zoom, I don't know if you guys have any ideas. Like getting coffee, but like virtually or something.
I'm gonna put myself out there and say, like, I mean, like, look, like we're like my entire office, like globally, we're being like very careful, so like networking now, even like internally at like our own organization is hard. I manage a team of people who for the last, couple of years lived and worked remotely for me up in New York. So for me, like travel to New York, like every week was like part of my routine because of like the network strength that built. But then COVID took that away. And there was questions about like how effective we were going to be at doing that. I think like in this case, we're still very reliant on, in our case, Teams meetings, WebEx, like more frequent like that. But when people come into the city, like one of the guys on my team, his girlfriend is completing the bar. They're living in DC. We opted to take, a socially distanced one-on-one and get coffee. So, I mean, we're just like being a little bit more careful about that. Like, which does not mean that like we're non-believers or we're not, trying to be careful. We're just being a little bit more thoughtful about how and when we do things. So I don't think it's all Zoom. It just means that like you just have to be a little bit more thoughtful with how you meet up with people, the environment in which you're meeting up with them, because different people are going to feel differently about that request, and you just have to respect that.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. I mean, I'm I'm gonna betray my generation a little bit and say I'm honestly, I'm sure you guys are. I'm zoomed out a lot of the time because I sit on Zoom for 10 hours a day for work. And so Marley, yeah, I mean, you and I might be doing phone calls instead of Zoom, and for all of you guys to think about that as not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, if you feel pressure to sort of turn the video camera on, investigate that a little bit, because oftentimes, especially if you're going after people who are already, you know, solidly into their careers, likely just keep in mind they're coming off of like an 8-hour day that was probably spent doing a ton of video calling already. So I love talking on the phone, or texting, or you know, sometimes I have Slack open and running with other people as well. So we're kind of living in a world where like instant messaging is also just a great way to just check in with somebody, without sort of feeling like you have to schedule, you know, this big video call. So I would just say, yes, definitely, you know, there are other great ways other than Zoom to connect with people, and don't be afraid to sort of think non-traditionally.
Yep.
Um,
Fantastic advice.
We have a question from Dr. Goodyear saying, what are the best tips for a cold email pitch? My students are always asking for tips on how to write an effective one. And she's probably indirecting me there because I definitely asked that question along with others in my capstone. But yeah, what are your thoughts on the best tips for a cold email pitch?
Kyle, do you get people cold pitching you in your inbox?
Yeah, I have a couple of pet peeves too that I can speak about. So I think, like, you know, for me, and I'll be like fairly honest, like when people call me Mr. Reese. So if my mentee hears this, because I know he addressed me as Mr. Reese, I'm like, I immediately think of my father, like, which is cool. Like, I really love my dad, but I'm much more of like a first name basis kind of person. So I think like it's something I've noticed like in work communications too, where I think everything's just a little bit more formal now. Like it's just, I mean, which is great. Like I'm actually very excited about this, because I think it means that it opens up, like it creates a more accessible environment in which you don't have to be, you know, kind of pretentious about like what you're after. I think you can just kind of be honest, like, hi, I want to talk to you. Like, I think what you do is interesting. Would you be willing to give me 15 minutes of your time? Like, I think it's that simple, just to say, hi, this is who I am. I like what you do, and you might be able to provide me some advice. Would you be willing to talk? And I think that's like literally all you need to say. And most people, I would say, like your hit rate with that will be pretty good.
Yeah, I agree. I think I always like to see that it's sometimes I get messages in my inbox and it makes me feel like they don't really even know who I am. Like they've just drafted something and then sent that out to a bunch of different people. And you know, that's fine, I guess, but I think it's always helpful to feel like someone is reaching out to me for a reason. Like what's the purpose? And I think related to that is I always like people who sort of say, this is what I notice about what you do and why that's interesting to me. This is what I'm curious about in the world. This is my sort of why, you know, like I'm interested in exploring how human nature will impact the changes in the workforce for the next 10 years or what, right? Like come up with some sort of design thinking question that, you know, really gets your juices going, that really makes you feel curious. And ideally it should be related to what it is that I can offer you, right? Because I don't want to feel like off the jump, like I don't actually have resources available to connect you to. So please know what it is that I do. And also, you know, don't be afraid to know what you're asking for. I think it's easiest for me to respond to someone who knows exactly why they've popped into my inbox and there's a very specific, you know, discrete request that they're making of me. That's the easiest thing for me because I can immediately say, great, I know who this person is. I know what excites them. And I very specifically know what help they're asking for. It's much harder to sort of get I don't really know what I want to do, but I see that you do brand and that's kind of cool. Could you tell me about what that is? well, no, I can't, because you can Google that. But come back to me once you've Googled what brand is, if you have a very specific sort of, question about it.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm definitely going to be using those the next time I have to be sending out a cold email, because they are nerve-wracking for a senior in college or a junior in college, whoever is sending them out. I know they can be very intimidating. Our next question comes from McKinley. It says, can it get complicated if your coworkers become your close friends? If so, how do you navigate that?
I would personally strongly advise against that. This is, I think, kind of like coming out of just like seeing how this can kind of like have some ill effects like for you in your own like professional like career growth. Like I used to work really closely with like the sales team at Gartner, and like before they kind of put us into different functional silos, like sales teams are very collaborative with one another. Like the relationships there can get very weird sometimes, just like frankly, like very candid. And they can be like, as a result of that, somewhat destructive when people, like take, the work activity and take, take that offline where you're drinking or you're partying together and stuff like that. It can lead to potentially like very professionally disruptive situations where I think in the case that I've seen, like people have been terminated, for the result of those like types of relationships, like no matter good or bad they were, just like it just didn't end well. I think like the type of relationship I think that works best for me, that I feel like has like kind of helped my team thrive, that helps me thrive, that personally like I get the most out of at Gartner, is like more of that kind of like true like collegial relationship. I'm not trying to find like a new best friend at work, but I'm trying to find people who help support me in like this kind of collective mission that we're working towards. And it's okay if we do other things outside of work. Personally, like I'm comfortable with maybe a smaller network of people, like friends, family, like people who I can kind of trust with like more kind of like intimate details of my life than like bringing that to the workplace. So that's just my own personal take. But Julia, I don't know if you feel differently or have similar thoughts.
Well, I always love it when Kyle and I can sort of have opposing views on things, because I think it keeps it a little spicy. But I love this question. I totally agree with a lot of what Kyle is saying. I think he's wise to caution you to think about sort of some of the like implications and ramifications that can come from close friendships at work. However, I will say that because I didn't really know anyone in New York, the large majority of my closest friends I made at my first job in the city, because I worked there for 6 years, almost 7 years. So some of my best friends still today, though I've moved on from that job, came from working at Landor. I think the thing that I would say, though, regardless of sort of which path you take, is I think understanding boundary settings, I think, is probably something that Kyle's alluding to, and that's not something that a ton of people have had experience with in college. I think being someone who understands your professional and personal boundaries is probably important, especially if you're starting out in a new city. I spent more time with my colleagues than I did with my family, the first year or two that I was in New York. And so naturally close relationships form from that kind of working environment. You're working late sometimes. You should feel, close and connected to the people that you're working with. I mean, that's ultimately, to me, why I stayed at Landor for so long, was because there were so many people there that I loved. But that said, knowing that, if you're hanging out with someone you work with on the weekends, when you go into the office at 8:30 or 9 on Monday morning, everyone's there to do work, and the company's best interest is sort of what needs to be placed front and center again. So I've had to disagree with some of my best friends in meetings before. I've had to really negotiate hard conversations with people who I'm friendly with who reported to me, and I think that that's something that you deal with, when it comes. But I would encourage all of you guys to really get comfortable with boundary setting and know like what feels authentic and true to yourself when you're outside the workplace, and what feels, right once you walk through those office doors or virtual doors again.
Thank you. I like what you said about recognizing your own personal boundaries with work boundaries. I think that is definitely something that probably should be said in regards to that question. I think a lot of people can tend to forget that sometimes, myself included, even though my job right now is at a retail store, but still, boundaries are important. Our next question comes from Olivia. Says, what are some ways to network online during the pandemic that might seem equally as meaningful as scheduling face-to-face meetings, such as grabbing coffee, which feels more intimate?
I feel like we sort of touched on this a little bit earlier, Olivia, but if there's something else specifically that you're looking for, feel free to jump in and unmute yourself. I mean, the only other thing I would maybe add is that there are a ton of virtual communities happening right now, professionally speaking. In addition to just being on Slack for my agency Integral, I'm also part of a bunch of other Slack threads that sort of convene industry professionals in my sort of area of interest across company, sort of really across the country. And I have noticed that there are some recent grads in those communities as well who are definitely there to network. I participate once a month in a virtual sort of happy hour with other startup founders and employees too in New York City. That's called Startup Grind. Again, like I sort of notice the new people that pop in just to very wisely keep their ear to the ground with people who are in hiring positions talking about the challenges of their companies right now. So I think there's tons of creative ways to sort of make sure you're not just stalking LinkedIn and just sending people emails, but like actually jumping in and getting involved in some of these communities that are out there. If you're specifically interested in the startup world, I would recommend following AngelList. It's a company that essentially keeps tabs on any job posting by most major funded or A or B or C seed round funded startups in the nation. So AngelList is a great community. That's how I found a lot of my professional networks.
And I'll add maybe one thing here, maybe less of a professional stance to that, but just thinking about like kind of finding and facilitating community connections. I love to hate this app, but it's called Nextdoor, which is like just an absolutely ridiculous like listserv of people complaining about everything in the city. And it's like tailored to your zip code. So you can find people, like once you live there, you verify your address, you kind of get permission to join this kind of weird community of your neighbors who just like, might actually have some of the same interests as you, or, like I scheduled, like we have a running trail near our house. So like I organized like a cleanup day recently of like socially distanced support. But it was like, let's go outside and do something, so like there's like ways and mechanisms to do that. But that I think is definitely helpful, keeping like a pulse on your community and, meeting some of the potentially, like the potential like cool and helpful people who might live literally like right next door to you. So that's the other side of that.
I love Nextdoor.
I do love it. It's so great. I am going to skip over some questions. I'll go to Megan's question. She said, this is also going to be our last question of the panel. If anyone wants to shoot another one, we'll send out all of the remaining questions to Kyle and Julia to answer on their own time. But when you moved for your first postgraduate job, did your company help financially with the move? How did that work for you?
I got no help. For me, it wasn't a move. They were like, do you want to work in New York City? And I was like, no. I was like, would you move? Like, what are you going to do differently for me? Like, this is like, again, later on in career, but like, even now is like, more like mid-level. They're like, oh, well, like maybe pay you a little bit more, but you'll have to find your own way up here. So, no at the beginning, I guess. And like, or no at the midpoint in my career, even though I had a little bit more seniority. So, yeah, I don't know if it's that common.
I think, yeah, I also didn't, relocation package wasn't, part of my initial offer either. I would also say, I don't want to be like not possibility oriented, because anything is possible. But I think typically for an entry level position, you're not going to find a ton of relocation support. However, you should always negotiate. And I think that's what Kyle was just talking about as well. And I encourage everyone not to accept their first offer. And if you know it's going to be financially challenging for you to move to a new city, and you've already eliminated your employer sort of giving you relocation support, then ask for more money. See if they'll be willing to give you a one-time signing bonus. Tell HR, talk to HR about the fact that that is something that is causing you anxiety, and see what's possible. Because a good lesson that I learned from a friend of mine is don't ask, don't get, right? Like, you won't get what you don't ask for. So be communicative about really where you need support, and see what's possible for your employer. And if it doesn't come in the form of what you were originally asking for, go back to the drawing board and see, if there's another way to essentially like help alleviate that financial burden.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. I know we still have a minute or two left, so if you have any closing words, but that is our panel for today. Thank you guys so much for your insight. I know I definitely am taking some of these notes with me, and I hope everyone else is too. But yeah, thank you guys so much, and have a great day. Enjoy the rest of the panels that are coming up.
Jada, thank you so much. You did a great job.
You.
We were in good hands. So thank you to you as well.
Thank you, Jada, for having us.
Of course. Thank you for allowing me to do this.
Cool.
Take care, everybody. And feel free to add Kyle and I on LinkedIn. We're happy to chat more.
Yep. See you guys later.
Bye.
Bye.